At 7:42 a.m. hours, the INS Vikramaditya was transiting through the Arabian Sea on a routine deployment patrol when a radar painted 52 Pakistani F-7PG fighters inbound from the northwest. The lead aircraft is 18 kilometers out, screaming toward the carrier at 920 kilometers per hour, with air-to-surface missiles mounted under the wings. But the Pakistani commander running this formation didn't know what was installed in the hangar bay just 4 weeks earlier. Without a warning, the whole airframe tumbles into the Arabian Sea without an explosion. No air-to-air engagement, no radar lock, no visual acquisition by any pilot. Just the wind over the fuselage and a splash. What took out this fighter is something the Indian Navy has spent a decade building. And in this war game scenario, set in the spring of 2026, the system has just been used in combat for the very first time. And 51 more Pakistani fighters are inbound from the northwest. Between the aircraft elevators and the aircraft tie-down points, there sits a shipping container that the hangar deck crew has been stepping around for 4 weeks without thinking about it. The container has no markings, no signage, no obvious purpose. And 4 weeks of stepping around it has trained the deck crew to ignore it entirely. Then, the roof slides open on hydraulic rails, and a directed energy emitter rises from inside on a stabilized mount, targeting array swinging across the northwestern horizon. The array sevels and locks onto a contact 11 kilometers out, about the distance from Mumbai's downtown to the international airport. The beam connects, invisible. No visible discharge, no smoke, no tracer at all. And for 2 seconds, the petty officer sees absolutely nothing happen. On the tactical display in the destroyer's Combat Information Center, the windowless room below decks where sailors fight the ship through screens 3 kilometers away, the contact is still there, still flying, still closing. 3 seconds. 4. Then, the contact disappears off the scope altogether. And at the limit of vision, a tiny black dot tumbles out of the sky and splashes into the Arabian Sea. The beam emitter slides 12 degrees, locks again, and holds the dwell on a second contact at 10 kilometers. 14 seconds later, that contact disappears off the scope too, and a second splash lands 2.5 kilometers from the first. The petty officer is still standing in the same spot. Whatever is in that container has now done it twice. What took down those fighters is the Shakti laser weapon system. Bharat Electronics built it, and the Navy tested it aboard the Vikramaditya for the first time in November 2025. This morning is the first time the system has fired at something that was actually trying to put a hole through an Indian warship. The container is not bolted into the hull. The container is bolted to the deck. The Navy ran a power cable out of an existing distribution panel and hooked it into the side of the housing. Then they lashed the whole thing down with the same chains that hold the MiG-29K to the deck during a cyclone. The whole installation took less time than getting your kitchen remodeled. The beam itself runs about 25 to 40 kilowatts. For reference, your microwave at home runs about 1 kilowatt. So this is roughly 35 microwaves, all focused on a single point the size of a quarter. That sounds modest by laser weapons standards, but it's plenty devastating against an aluminum airframe. Shakti exists for one job: stopping the small, fast, lightly built fighters that Pakistan has been launching in waves since the Kashmir conflict first escalated, draining the Navy's interceptor count. Every other naval weapon costs more to build than the thing it's pointed at. Shakti does not. What just hit the water? The F-7PG, Pakistan's workhorse single-engine fighter. Delta wing design, aluminum airframe, air-to-surface ordnance load. Range, about 2,200 kilometers. Roughly the same distance from Delhi to Bangkok, with fuel to spare. Pakistan builds them under license for approximately $28 million apiece. The thing is fast, maneuverable, and mechanically robust. Pakistan's edge is that they field over 300 of them. Shakti costs about $1 a shot. The price of the electricity that fires the beam. And the fighters it just put in the water cost $28 million each. That is $1 on the rail to take down $56 million worth of Pakistani hardware. That is the magic. 2 fighters down. Total ammunition spent roughly $2, about what the deck crew just spent on tea. Across the deck, the petty officer steps over a thick power cable running from a deck distribution panel into the side of the container, and the cable is warm to the touch. Inside the container, the heat exchangers are humming hard enough that the deck plating around them is starting to feel it. If you look here, at that power cable running into the container, that is the entire installation. There's no dry dock time anywhere in this picture, no hull modification, no new wiring runs anywhere on the ship. Putting a new weapon on a warship normally means a yard period that takes months and burns through hundreds of millions of rupees in shipyard contracts before the system's fired its first shot. The Vikramaditya isn't due for refueling and overhaul until the late 2030s, so there was no schedule window to slot a new weapon into. The Navy went around the problem entirely, and the result is sitting on the deck, dropping fighters for $1 a shot. Think of it as installing a window AC unit instead of redoing the entire central air. Less power, less work, but it works tomorrow morning instead of in 2037, because the fighter threat has been showing up faster than the Navy's normal procurement timeline can keep up with. The beam emitter slides again, locks and holds. A third one disappears off the scope, then a fourth, then a fifth. That puts 47 fighters still inbound, and the strike group's missile cells haven't been touched. The Vikramaditya carries 64 vertical launch cells loaded for this deployment, and INS Kolkata and INS Kochi bring 32 more each on top of that. Total cells across the formation, 128. Total fighters in the swarm, 52. The math should be a rout. Almost 2.5 missiles for every fighter, with cells to spare. Which raises the obvious question: why does the strike group need a laser at all? The answer is 480 kilometers east, in a Pakistan Air Force Operations Center on the outskirts of Rawalpindi. A Pakistani Air Commodore watches the same engagement on his own tactical display, and his fighter count drops by 1 every 14 seconds, while he takes notes. This morning is not the attack. This morning is the math problem the next attack runs on. The Commodore built today's plan around a single number: the cost of the interceptors the Americans normally used to stop his fighters. Each F-7PG costs Pakistan about $28 million. The interceptor that stops it costs the Indian Navy $2.5 million. Every shot trades $1 for 11 cents on the cost exchange ledger. The Indians win every individual engagement and still go broke faster than Pakistan does. That's the slot machine the Navy's been stuck in since the escalation started. Win every spin, go home with empty pockets. It's like winning every hand at the family poker game, while your nephew quietly empties your wallet under the table. The Commodore doesn't need to put a fighter through the carrier's deck this morning. He needs the strike group to fire enough interceptors that the next attack finds the magazine empty and the carrier turning for port. The next attack happens 4 days from now, when his second wave is fueled and ready. The fighters aren't the weapon. The fighters are the bait, and the trap is the ammunition counter on the tactical display. But on the display, the launch counter has not moved. 8 fighters into the engagement, cells still loaded out at 64. The Commodore doesn't yet realize that. He's still planning around the version of this fight where the destroyer has fired a dozen interceptors by now. And in that version, he knows exactly what comes next. His plan works on paper because of one specific feature of the Barak 8 vertical launch system. There is no way to reload it at sea. The Indian Navy has been working on the capability for over 18 years, and as of this morning, it doesn't yet exist. You can't crane a missile canister directly into a destroyer cell from a moving supply ship. Not in any sea state, not from any ship the Navy has ever built, not in any weather condition that exists on Earth. The Navy has tested concepts for 2 decades, and none of them have ever worked operationally. None of them are coming this year, or next year, or the year after that. So when the destroyer burns through her cells, the destroyer has exactly one option: leave the fight. Sail to one of a handful of piers certified to handle Barak 8 ordnance: Mumbai, Kochi, Visakhapatnam. Tie her up alongside a missile handling crane and spend days reloading vertically, while a relief crew sleeps in the barracks ashore. There is no in-between. There is no underway replenishment ship that exists today, or that will exist tomorrow, that can put a missile back in a destroyer cell at sea. It's like owning a car that only can be refueled at 4 specific dealerships in the world, and the closest one is a 2-week drive away. If the destroyer fires through her magazine in this engagement, the carrier loses her air and missile defense commander for 2 weeks at minimum. By then, the Commodore's 4-day window has closed, and the second wave has either gotten through or never had to launch in the first place. The fight is over before the cells get back into theater. That's the trap, and Shakti is what the Commodore didn't account for. The container fires its 9th silent splash, then its 10th. The deck around the container is warm now, and the coolant lines are pulsing visibly against the deck plating. The petty officer has long since moved on to other duties. The beam emitter keeps working. The launch counter still hasn't moved. In Rawalpindi, the Commodore's display refreshes through another iteration. Fighter count, 43. Then 42. Then 41. The Indians are stopping his fighters, but the Commodore can't see how. There's been no missile launch from the strike group on his radar feed in the last 8 minutes. No air-to-air engagement signature of any kind. No chaff pattern from his destroyers. His fighters are simply going dark mid-flight, at the same rate they would if the destroyer were burning through interceptors at full pace. What the Commodore doesn't know is that the destroyer has not fired a single cell. The Indians are stopping his entire swarm with a shipping container and a power cable. He doesn't have a model for what's happening on his display. It's the military equivalent of pulling up your bank app and seeing charges you didn't authorize. Something is very clearly happening. You just have no idea what. 22 minutes into the engagement, 18 splashes deep. The deck around the container is warm enough to feel through your boot soles. The heat exchangers along the container's flank are venting steadily into the humid Arabian air. Frost has formed on the metal near the cooling intakes. Moisture pulled out of the air so fast it freezes onto housing and burns to the touch. A deck crew member walks past, glances at the readout panel, and keeps moving, like he's seen it 100 times. If you look here at the coolant lines and the frost forming on the heat exchanger, all of that energy has to come from somewhere. The answer is 5 decks below the flight deck. Two KS-B-type nuclear reactors run the Vikramaditya. They're the same reactors that drive her 4 propeller shafts at 32+ knots, run her steam catapults, power her radars, her aircraft elevators, and her air conditioning. They generate hundreds of megawatts of electrical power, which the captain can route wherever the ship needs it. A 40-kilowatt laser running continuously, once you account for cooling and beam control, needs about 120 kilowatts of input power. The Vikramaditya's reactor doesn't notice. Every other ship that has ever tested a laser at sea ran on conventional engines. Several regional Navy vessels, and every single one hit the same wall. Their power plants run out of juice mid-flight, like a phone dying mid-call. The Vikramaditya has a reactor, and a reactor doesn't run out. As long as the rods are hot, Shakti keeps firing. Months, years, indefinitely if the ship's other power demands stay inside the budget. The reactor is the magazine, and the magazine's idea of running low is the same as your grandmother's idea of running low on criticisms at Sunday dinner. It doesn't happen. That's the single biggest reason the Shakti test got assigned to a carrier instead of a destroyer. Fighter 19 disappears off the scope. Fighter 20 follows 11 seconds later. The beam emitter locks a fighter, holds for 2 seconds, slides off as the wing fails, and locks the next one. The rhythm becomes visible across 3 or 4 engagements. 2 or 3 seconds of held position, then a slide, then another splash, like a metronome counting time on the Commodore's bad morning. If you look here at the rhythm of those splashes, that is dwell time, and dwell time is how a laser does the work. A missile destroys a target by getting close enough to detonate a warhead nearby, and the blast and shrapnel handle the rest.